Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Big Questions, Small Steps. My name is Amanda, and I'm so glad that you could join me today. Today, we're going to continue on in our series looking at stories from the New Testament that I taught when I was a Sunday school teacher as well as a confirmation teacher growing up. We're going to read the stories from the New Testament. I'm going to share how I explained the story to the kids that I was teaching. Frequently it was like kindergarten-ish age, and how I would help them apply that story to their life. And then I'm going to share issues or concerns or confusions I have with my knowledge now on this story as I work towards my conversion into Judaism. So, without further ado, let's get started. Today, we are looking at the story that's quite popular. It's called The Good Samaritan. Let's dive in. So the story of the Good Samaritan is one that many Christians will know. This story is, well, they tell us that this story is to teach us a lesson about how we're supposed to act towards each other. Okay? Now, this story is not a story that historically happened. This story is literally a story. Jesus is telling a parable. So it's a story with a lesson attached to it. And he does this quite frequently in the New Testament. Now, I myself am one who loves analogies. It helps me understand concepts and stories on a deeper level. So I don't have a problem as far as parables and analogy stories and helping you understand things on a deeper level, because I know that one person explaining a concept isn't going to be the same as another person explaining a concept. Everyone learns differently. So if you need a story in order to learn, then you should have a story. Okay? So without further ado, let's get started. We're going to be reading the story from the Good News Bible. We have today's English version. That's what we're going to be reading out of. So the story again is called The Good Samaritan. And we have this parable or this story from the book of Luke. It's one of the Gospels. Again, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are the four Gospels. And people frequently think that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are the actual people who wrote the Bible, those books. That's not the case. We don't know who wrote those books. They are actually anonymously written. But we do know that a majority of the New Testament was actually written by a man named Paul. So we are looking in the book of Luke. We are on chapter 10, verses 25 through 37. And the story is called The Parable of the Good Samaritan. So let's read it. A teacher of the law came up and tried to trap Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to receive eternal life?" Jesus answered him, "What do the scriptures say? How do you interpret them?" The man answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind. And love your neighbor as you love yourself." "You're right," Jesus answered. "Do this, and you will live." But the teacher of the law wanted to justify himself. So he asked Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" Jesus answered, "There was once a man who was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when robbers attacked him, stripped him, and beat him up, leaving him half dead. It so happened that a priest was going down the road, and when he saw the man, he walked on the other side. In the same way, a Levite, so that's another person who is really, he's more Jewish, and he came along. He came by, went over, and looked at the man, then walked on by on the other side. So first you have the priest coming, keeps on walking, doesn't really even stop. Then you have this Levi come, he looks at the person, he stops, looks at the person, and then crosses and keeps on walking, okay? But a Samaritan, and a Samaritan was not somebody that was very well liked at that time in this area, but a Samaritan who was traveling that way came upon the man, and when he saw him, his heart was filled with pity. He went over to him, poured oil and wine on his wounds, and bandaged them. Then he put the man on his own animal and took him to an inn, where he took care of him. The next day, he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper. "Take care of him," he said, "and when I come back this way, I will pay you whatever else you spend on him." And Jesus concluded, "In your opinion, which one of these 3 acted like a neighbor towards the man attacked by the robbers?" The teacher of the law answered, "The one who was kind to him." Jesus replied, "You go then and do the same." Okay, so there's a lot of little pieces to that story that are tough to kind of put together. So before I start with what I have struggles with, let's bring it back to when I was teaching the kids this story. We would talk about how sometimes people are hurt and you don't notice them, or maybe you walk by somebody who happens to be hungry or homeless on the street and you don't even make eye contact. You pretend you don't see them, and how that might make them feel. Okay. We talked about how if your sibling is ignoring you because you're being annoying, how that kind of makes you feel. It irks you inside and it doesn't make you feel very good. We then take it and we took a next step forward. How did they feel when they were sick or they were hurt and their mom or dad helped them? Okay. Little kids typically don't have a whole bunch of strangers coming to help them. And in those cases, they're more scared than anything. So they didn't quite get the concept of a Samaritan, a stranger who doesn't know you. He's going to come put you in a hotel. It's going to take care of you. That's more scary than anything to a little kid. So we basically put it as, you have your teacher come, they walk by, they're ignoring you completely. How does that make you feel? You have another person come by, they look at you, ignore you, and keep on walking. Then you have your parents come, and then they're going to help you. How does each one make you feel? How does that help? And then how can we help people going forward? So if you see someone who is hungry or homeless, a 4-year-old doesn't have money, but what could you do? You could smile at them. You could wave. You could acknowledge their presence, because even that is powerful. Okay? And we talked about what we can do to help other people. So frequently we would have a drive in church for funds, or we collected food items, and we also collected items like socks and mittens and things like that for homeless shelters in the area. Ways to help out. And we would frequently talk about, are you being a good Samaritan, when we were looking at our actions, or if we were in Sunday school and we were playing and they were not sharing. Sometimes you would say, "Oh, that would make Jesus so sad." Or you might say, which one are you being? Are you being the Good Samaritan, or are you being a not nice friend? And kind of use it more as a guilt way. So the parable is supposed to be used to teach you to think outside of yourself, not worry just about where you're going, but how you're treating other people in the process. And that concept is very tough for little kids because they're very egocentric. All they can think about is them. And if you have any children, I'm sure that you have seen this, where they might start bickering with each other over toys or whatever it is. So that's the story of the Good Samaritan. Okay? So Again, I have no problems with stories being used to teach you something, okay? I don't love the idea of the whole premise of the story being used because somebody came up to Jesus and said, "Hey, what am I supposed to do? Who's my neighbor?" I feel like that's just redundant, and I don't really care if they're trying to figure out different things. I believe that in the Jewish scriptures, there's already passages about how we're supposed to treat each other. So the parable is a great story. If it helps you understand what you're supposed to do better, wonderful. But we don't need it because it's already in the Jewish scriptures. There are laws about how we're supposed to treat each other. There's laws about you're not supposed to gossip. There's laws and rules and regulations on how we're supposed to treat each other and respect each other. And it's just kind of a moot point. The New Testament is basically a bunch of stories. It's a bunch of stories, and some of them Jesus is the highlight, and some of them Jesus is playing a lesser highlight role, but it's not needed, in my opinion. There are so many great stories in the Jewish scriptures that we don't need it. There is no documentation to say that, oh yes, there actually was a person who was actually beaten up by some robbers, stripped, left naked in this road, beaten up, half alive. We don't have any actual evidence of that. We don't have evidence that this guy is walking from Jerusalem to Jericho and he's going to pour out the wine and the oil on this naked person's wounds, and then he's going to take him to a hotel or an inn and pay the hotel innkeeper to take care of him while he's gone. That, in my logical sense and in today's mind, there are so many things that just don't add up there. What's the likelihood? I was a first responder, okay? I was a first responder. I worked on an ambulance. Absolutely, if somebody was hurt, I would want to help them. Now, will I go to the point of I'm going to help you and now I'm going to transport you to a hotel. I'm going to pay for your hotel, bandage you, call the doctor, get all these things. Oh, sorry, I've got to go to work. I'm going to pay the innkeeper now to take care of you. No, that's it's just a bit far-fetched for me. I don't believe it happened like that. I think it's a great story, but truthfully, it's an unneeded story because the preachings are already in the Jewish Bible, in my opinion. So there you have it, my version of the Good Samaritan story. I hope you enjoyed today's presentation, because the more you know, the more you grow. Hope that the new perspective gains you a little bit more insight. If you liked today's presentation, please go ahead and like and subscribe to this channel so you can see when our next videos come out. Until next time, thanks so much for joining me, and you all take care. Bye-bye.